When the internet began, bulletin board services, or BBS, became the first online communities of the so-called information superhighway. Using their phone lines, people logged in from all over America to talk about sports, games, movies, and on one BBS in particular, share their ghost stories. Over time, those communities all went dark, except for one lone server that continues to operate somewhere in an unknown part of Pennsylvania's Rust Belt. A relic of the 1990s, veiled in mystery, it is a digital archive of humanity's strangest encounters with the unknown, as told by the people who experienced them. My name is Brandon Schexnayder, and you are listening to Fear Daily.
Subject, snake in the grass. User, one Bren Deep. Posted, September 22nd, 1997.
There's no statute of limitations on murder, right? And I guess a confession is useless, legally speaking, if no one knows who left it. Hell, I don't know why I'm worried about the law. At least if I get this all down now, someone will know what happened. Even if they figure out who I am, it won't matter. Mr. Nolan is outside my door, and I'm too tired to run anymore. I never thought he was real. I thought it was a joke my business partner Brandon had hooked up, some southern mumbo-jumbo inside joke I just didn't get. But no, he's real. He's pissed, and my last sensory experience on this earth is going to be his stinking graveyard breath in my face as he throttles the life from me. Speaking of Brandon, I guess he's where I should start. If I were to say I had to kill him, you'd think that was some bullshit justification for what I did. It's not. If you'd seen him, you'd know why I had to dump him in a swamp. That goddamn velvet voice, that long hair and crooked grin. The man was smooth as hog fat, and me, I look like the hog the fat was taken from. If a wizard ever gave you 3 wishes and you spent the first 2 nailing supermodels and the third bringing a pile of unwashed laundry to life, that's me all day, baby. My first wife used to call me the Albanian cheeseburger, and it wasn't in a playful way. She moved to a swamp too, except she didn't have Mr. Nolan looking over her. Okay, so why all this playing in the swamp? Sometimes a man gets pushed to his limits. In the case of Brandon and I, we started a business together making widgets. What widgets, you ask? Which business? What part of anonymity don't you understand? All you ever need to know is we went into business together 5 years ago making a thing. Well, Brandon made the thing and designed it, but I was the one who put together a marketing plan and rounded up the capital to make it happen. I got the offices, the staff. Did I pick a bigger space than we needed at the time? Sure, of course, and maybe I hired staff based on how good they'd look on my arm instead of how well they knew their jobs. Sue me. I knew the widget was going to make bank, so who cared if I made some big swings early in the game? When I met Brandon, he was working for one of those big nerd outfits who make the computers. You know the ones. Back then, I was delivering office furniture. Smart guys who do delivery know you can sometimes sweet-talk your way into the loading dock, and from there, the world's your oyster. You can ogle the girls. Not that there's many in that business. Those cubicle farms are real sausage parties. And steal extra toilet paper from the John and fill your pockets with goodies in the lunchroom. Dorks hate conflict, so even if they see you, they won't say shit. One day, I dropped a load of desks off at one of these places and was pocketing a handful of granola bars when I heard this smooth voice talking about numbers and computer chips and some such BS. The nerds he was talking to didn't seem all that interested. Me, on the other hand, I was, because I know bullshitters, and this guy wasn't one. Whatever he's talking about is the real deal, and these virgins don't want to hear it. So I peek out from the lunchroom and catch a look of the guy I'd eventually find out is Brandon. Right away, I understood why Geek Patrol doesn't want anything to do with him. He's good looking, 6'2" or thereabouts, long brown hair to the middle of his back like some kind of fairy tale prince, and a voice made for the DJ booth of a strip joint, one of the classy ones. Like I said, I know bullshit, and bullshit wasn't what Prince Charming was spinning. Once he was done talking to the losers, I accidentally bumped into him and used it as an excuse to start up a conversation. I'm not good at much in this world, but I can soak up other people's words like a sponge and turn them back around as if they were my own. Within 10 minutes, I knew that Prince Charming was Brandon and that this long hair was a world-class genius who couldn't get past the first ring of corporate because dorks hate facial symmetry. This was an opportunity, and there was no way I'd let it go to waste. Not only am I good at wielding bullshit like a fucking Viking with an axe, I'm good at making friends, or at least making people think we're friends. I told Prince Charming we should hang out, talk shop, and we did. After that first breakfast, I knew this thing he was talking about was going to be huge. I also knew I wanted in. A month later, I convinced him it had enough thinking different. It was time to think big. We spent the next couple months getting our new company set up. I did the legwork, he did the nerd work, it all came out even. Whenever he talked that tech gobbledygook at me, I'd just nod and smile, then turn whatever it was he said back at him in the form of a question. He was off like a puppy chasing a ball. I only ever learned 3 things about him, and believe me, if I could have learned less, I would have. First, he was from New Orleans. Second, he was an orphan. And third, his family was cursed. He used to say that number 2 was the fault of number 3, that a long time ago, someone in his family pissed off this old prick who lived in the swamps, Mr. Nolan. He was some kind of hedge wizard or something, and when Brandon's grand whatever crossed him, Mr. Nolan said that the price would be his whole family's future. He'd have kids and grandkids and great-grandkids, all of them healthy. The catch was that their lives all belonged to Mr. Nolan. They'd get to live long enough to continue the bloodline, then he would come to take his prize. Brandon used to say that everyone in New Orleans knew his family and knew you didn't kill them because only Mr. Nolan got to do that. How was I supposed to know that it wasn't just bullshit? Hell, if B hadn't stuck that perfect Roman nose of his in where it didn't belong, none of this would have been an issue. He was so goddamn honest, it made me sick. When he saw the books, the real books, he hit the roof. I tried talking him down, explaining my side of things. Yeah, the office was too big. Yeah, me and my secretary Tori spent alone time at the Taj in Atlantic City. I built this place from the ground up. Didn't I deserve to enjoy some of the fruits of my labor? Because I knew this widget was gonna sell like hotcakes, and once it did, the company could go public. We'd all be too rich for this shit to matter. B wouldn't hear it. It was all blah, blah, blah. I'm the one who actually builds things, and I have to live in a shitbox apartment in shit town while you're staying at 5-star hotels. Whatever. I would have let it slide if he hadn't started making noise about the IRS and SEC. It's like he wanted me to kill him, if you think about it, so I did. Shame how caving in a skull fucked up that head of hair the way it did. Goddamn thing was a work of art. In retrospect, with the widget not quite done, I probably should have tried harder to take him off the ledge. Well, you know what they say about hindsight. The whole time, I didn't think about Mr. Nolan once. I miss those days. B's body went into the same swamp where I stashed Shelley, my first wife. I figured she'd enjoy the company. I should have known something was wrong when the body wouldn't sink. Normally, all you need to do to get a body to drop in the goop is fill the pockets with rocks and puncture the guts so it doesn't bloat up with air. I'd done that, and yet B just wouldn't go down. I cut a long stick down, poked at him, nothing. It was like the water didn't want him. I was working on a plan B when the sky went dark. Not like clouds passed overhead, oh, no. Like it went from day to night, and the amount of time it takes to squeak out a fart on the first date. A wind started to blow, warm at first, then colder and harder the longer it went on. It was the middle of summer, and I could see my breath. The chill started digging its way into my bones, cramping my muscles, forcing me to shiver. Then came the horn. Imagine a foghorn, except 1,000 times louder and coming from everywhere at once. Outside, inside, like it was the only real thing in the world. The black water of the swamp vibrated along with it. My hands to my ears, I stumbled in the direction of my truck. I didn't know what was going on, and I didn't intend to stick around to find out. Except it was all wasted effort. The horn stopped as soon as I got in the front seat, and then there he was, framed by my windshield, the shimmering shape of a man, 8 feet tall at least, wearing what I think was a broad-brimmed hat and long cloak. I say I think because you couldn't look right at him, and it hurt deep inside your skull, a migraine that felt like it would crack your brain in two if you tested it. I didn't want to test it, didn't want to deal with any of it. Mr. Nolan had other ideas. Do you know who I am? His voice was the sound of a venomous snake slithering its way toward you through dry grass. Something warm bloomed in my pants, contrasting with the cold everywhere else. Dimly, I realized I was so afraid I pissed my pants. You know, and you know what you've taken from me. My prize, my harvest. The frigid wind grew in power, frost beginning to spiderweb in from the corners of the windshield. You belong to me, but not now. First, I will fatten your soul on fear. At the solstice, I will reap what you have sown. Suddenly, it all disappeared. The wind, the cold, the frost. Everything except for the piss in my pants. A reminder that it had all happened. That Mr. Nolan was real, and he decided I was going to be the one carrying Brandon's family baggage. I hightailed it out of the swamp as fast as the truck would go, leaving the body to sink or rot or stay there until Judgment Day. It's been 6 months, and I've driven across the country 4 times trying to outrun what's coming. Not the feds, who ID'd both Brandon and Shelley's bodies after a tow crew had found them while retrieving some dipshit's car. Not the IRS and SEC, who came calling after my co-founder turned up swampside and took issue with laissez-faire attitude toward a county. No, I've been trying to hide from a force of nature I know nothing about except that I fucked it over. Contrary to what people will tell you, there is something out there more frightening than the IRS. Wherever I went, I'd feel him follow the cold spots, no matter how high the thermostat was. Dreams of having my soul pulled apart against an endless backdrop of stars. However fast or far I ran, Mr. Nolan was never far behind. Now, it's the solstice and I'm tired of running. Ice crystals are forming on the screen, and even though I'm locked inside a cabin in Tahoe, I can hear that snake wriggling toward me through dry grass.
Subject, Screaming Deal. User, Sandex Surf T. Posted, January 8, 1994.
Anyone who can afford to live at the beach should. There's nothing like waking up in the morning with the sun on your face and the smell of sea spray in the air. My wife Denise and I have been here on the water for going on 15 years now, and we keep trying to convince our friends to come too while the land is, if not cheap, cheaper than it's gonna be in 10 years. So far, we've managed to convince one couple, Greg and Helen, to buy in, and we thought our other friends, Mike and Tina, were a lock, but when they came out to look at property, something happened that soured them on the area for good. If you're going to stay at a motel in our neck of the woods, your choices are either the Seafoam, which is lovely and clean, or you can take your pick of the Traps on Tourist Row, which are cheap. When Mike and Tina told us they were coming out, we told them where to book, but when they arrived, they called us from one of the ghastlier spots on the row. The first night, we had agreed to meet at their motel room for a drink before going out to dinner, although that had been when we thought they were staying at the Seafoam. Our house came with a strip of private beach, so we never really go anywhere near the row during the course of a regular day, and the drive to Mike and Tina's motel was a great reminder as to why that's a blessing. Even though the sun was starting to set, the road was still thronged with holiday makers in their barely there swimwear, children running amok. Denise shuddered as we pulled into the parking lot, our LeSabre standing out amongst the beat-up Pontiacs and Fiestas. The wall had been white at some point in the distant past, but time and the elements had faded them to a dull gray. In front of each room was a lawn chair and a small table, atop which sat a brown glass ashtray. It was the kind of place I might have stayed in college during a bender in Cape Cod. Hardly the sort of place you'd expect grown professional adults to voluntarily spend their time. Mike and Tina's room was 15, right in the corner of the complex next to the Coke and ice machines, adjacent to a room that had no number on the door. I raised my hand to knock, but as I did, I noticed someone staring at us from around the side of the Coke machine. I turned to look directly at them, but it wasn't a person, not really. What it was a black face with no features whatsoever, and yet I was sure it was looking at me. My blood ran cold. Was it a costume? A prank? Denise asked what I was doing, and before I could ask if she was seeing what I was, the head withdrew completely behind the machine. I waved her off and knocked on the door. Mike answered, a big grin on his face and a drink in his hand. Their room turned out to be 2 rooms, a suite really, with the dividing wall knocked out and a privacy wall built in the far corner around the bed and ensuite. In our half of the space, there was a kitchenette against the back wall and an L-shaped sectional sofa in the middle, opposite a TV cabinet. I asked Mike how they had ended up here instead of the seafoam, and I heard Tina laughing from the bedroom. Mike laughed too and said that it had been a screaming deal, the kind that was too good to turn down. The rest of the night wasn't anything special. We all went to dinner at the sandbar, then drinks at the jetty. Mike and Tina were excited to go house hunting the next day, and we tried to be as encouraging as possible, since we wanted them here with us rather than the city, which we rarely go out to anymore. We parted just after 11 with a promise to pick them up in the morning. Their motel wasn't any more appealing in the daylight than it had been at sunset. In fact, despite it being a perfect summer day, like we'd all been preserved under a blue glass dome, the motel somehow still managed to look dim. Denise and I had expected them to be ready when we arrived, but instead, Mike opened the door looking bleary-eyed and exhausted, as if he'd been awake all night. I told him he looked like hell and got a weak chuckle out of him. He waved us in and gestured us toward the sectional. Tina, when she finally came out of the room, didn't look much better than Mike, her eyes baggy, her lipstick hastily applied. Thankfully, we were only a few minutes late to our appointment with the realtor, Howard. Some of the properties he showed were everything our friends were looking for, but they just didn't seem all that invested in any of it. A couple times during showings, they would disappear into an adjacent room, their voices dropping to a whisper. I couldn't make out all of what they were saying, but it was fairly apparent they were having a fight. It took me aback because in the entire time I've known them, which has to be more than 10 years, I've never heard them go at it that way. They had fights, of course. Mike would talk about it at poker nights, but never where anyone could hear. After each whisper fight, they'd join us and would all pretend like we didn't know what was going on. After what was frankly an exhausting day of looking at houses, we suggested dinner at La Scala, but they demurred, saying they hadn't slept well the night before and would prefer to make an early night of it. We dropped them off back at the motel where I expected them to quickly head inside, but instead they stayed in the car talking with Denise and I for the better part of half an hour. Not that we minded, they're our friends after all, but considering how insular they'd been all day and how tired they not only claimed to be, but looked, it was unexpected. At length, they sighed and Mike said they should probably go. They were still standing at the curb when we pulled away. In the morning, there was a knock at our door. Imagine our surprise when I opened it to find Mike and Tina there, surrounded by suitcases. If they'd looked tired the morning before, they now looked like the walking dead. Once we got them and their bags inside, Denise made coffee and we all sat around the patio table. I was about to ask what was going on when Tina started crying and Mike pulled her close. He was the one who told us everything. The screaming deal they'd gotten on their motel had turned out to be more scream than deal. He said that Tina hadn't been all that high on the place from the start, saying she'd felt uncomfortable the moment their taxi had pulled up. Her discomfort had gotten worse when she started seeing what she described as men who weren't all the way there, looking at her from around corners, first outside the room, then inside it. At that, my chest tightened, but I didn't interrupt. Mike had waved off Tina's concerns, saying she was just jet-lagged, but then on their first full night, they were kept awake by what sounded like someone playing drums in the night room. Mike had complained to the front desk, but was told that both rooms on either side of them were empty. The racket had kept them up all night. Worse, around 4 a.m, Tina got up to use the bathroom, and as she sat on the toilet, she felt a finger slide across the back of her neck. It had rendered her a total wreck, Mike said, and they almost hadn't come house hunting with us, but the thought of staying in the room was worse than being out. After we dropped them off, they'd stayed on the sidewalk outside the motel for another half an hour before making their way inside. It was then Mike started seeing the peekers too. They looked like shadows of people, he said, fully formed but with no features. Inside the room, they'd tried sitting on the sofa to watch some TV before bed, but the lights in the room, lamps, overheads, everything kept cutting out, and each time they did, the station on the TV would change to what Mike called some PBS thing with a fat clown and these awful puppets. He said that they could never find the show by channel surfing around the dial. It only ever came up during the power dips. When they climbed into bed, it was more out of frustration than fatigue, and that would turn out to be the worst choice of all. Though they can't say exactly when, each of them independently realized that they were frozen in place. They could make simple sounds, but it was as if every muscle, save for those which moved their eyes, was locked up. For what felt like hours, they watched passing headlights slide across the ceiling until the shadows themselves began to move. Tina seemed to draw further into herself as Mike got to this part, and he himself looked pale. The shadows had seemed to flow up the wall and across the ceiling until they were both looking at a sort of oily pool impossibly hanging there above them. Shapes began to form out of that pool, shining heads and bodies dangling closer and closer to where Mike and Tina lay. The limbs of these things were long and pointed, without hands or fingers, and jabbed down into both of our friends, never making contact but producing terrible pains inside their bodies. At intervals, the shadow heads would draw back, looking directly at them with their eyeless faces, and they could see what appeared to be a mouth slowly opening. From it issued an ear-splitting sound of metal grinding on metal, so loud that Mike said he thought he was going to lose his mind. He paused in the telling just then and turned his face towards the sun, like he was hoping its rays might burn away the memories. Mike exhaled a heavy, shuddering breath and said that this went on for hours. The terror, the stabbing pains, the intermittent grinding noises that he came to realize were laughter. He thought they were going to die there, but when sunrise came, the creatures were gone in a blink and they could move. Within an hour, they were packed and without anywhere else to go at our door. Mike hugged Tina and drew her closer. I looked at Denise, who was never great at keeping her emotions off her face, and currently it was saying, "These people have lost their minds." Tina could see it too, and before she had to defend herself, I said we believed them. I then admitted I had seen one of the peekers myself when we'd first gone to pick them up, and Tina began to cry again, this time in relief. We put them up in our spare room where they slept the rest of the day. Once they'd rested, we finally had that dinner at La Scala, and it was just like old times until we put them on the plane the next morning. They had been back in the city for a week before Mike called to say they'd changed their mind about moving. I could hardly blame them.
Fear Daily is an independent podcast hosted by Brandon Schexnayder and written by Brennan Storr. with Joanna Smith serving as the consulting editor, audio production by Rachel Boyd and sound design by Southern Gothic Media. This podcast is a work of fiction. Names, characters, places, and incidents are either products of the author's imagination or are used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or to real events or locations, is entirely coincidental. Ad-free versions of Fear Daily are available now on your favorite podcast apps. For more information, visit feardaily.com. But move fast, before the server goes offline.